There's a name that doesn't appear in your Bible, not because it never existed, but because someone made sure you'd never find it. They say she was Adam's first wife, created not from his rib, but from the same earth. Equal, untamed, unwilling to kneel, she refused to obey, and for that she vanished from Eden and from history. But her name was never erased from everywhere. It lingers in ancient Sumerian tablets, in forbidden pages buried in Vatican vaults, and in the veiled rituals of secret orders. The name is Lilith. And what if she was never a demon at all, but the first truth the world wasn't ready to hear? They don't teach you this version in Sunday school. In one of the oldest Jewish mystical texts, the Alphabet of Ben Sira, a hidden creation story lies buried beneath centuries of censorship and silence. It speaks of Lilith not as a demon, but as the first woman, formed at the same moment and from the same soil as Adam, not from his rib, not as an afterthought, but as his equal. And that was the problem. According to the text, when Adam demanded dominance, Lilith refused to submit. "Why should I lie beneath you," she said, "when we were made from the same dust?" Her words weren't just defiance, they were heresy in the eyes of order. She spoke the ineffable name of God, a word forbidden to mortal lips, and with it she rose into the air and fled the Garden of Eden. Most versions of this story end here, but fragments of the tale continue in Kabbalistic writings and obscure scrolls found only in private collections. Texts that hint at a deeper truth. Lilith did not fall. She escaped. 3 angels were sent to retrieve her. Their names, Senoi, Sansanoi, and Semanjilof, rarely appear in mainstream theology. Yet in ancient occult traditions, these names are inscribed onto protective amulets, wards used to defend infants from Lilith the child snatcher. What kind of woman requires 3 divine agents to bring her down? Some say she refused to return because she knew the price of obedience. Others claim she made a pact, one that cursed her to lose 100 of her children every day in exchange for her freedom. But what if that curse was the mythology of men trying to punish a woman who chose not to kneel? The very act of speaking the sacred name, the act that gave her the power to fly, became the origin of her demonization. But to those who study the hidden paths of history, to those who dare open the sealed pages and trace the ink faded by time, Lilith was not a demon. She was the first exile, the first rebel, and perhaps the first woman who ever said no. Before she was Lilith, she was Lilitu. Long before Eden, before Hebrew letters carved myths into sacred stone, civilizations rose and fell along the rivers of Mesopotamia, and in those ancient cities, Ur, Akkad, Babylon, whispers of a female night spirit took shape. Her name was Lilitu, a wind demon, seductive and dangerous, roaming the night skies, her hair long, young, and wild like a storm unleashed. In Sumerian and Akkadian incantation tablets dating as far back as 2000 BCE, Lilitu was invoked, not as a demon to banish, but as a force to acknowledge. She was associated with disease, desire, and dream. She didn't just haunt the night, she was the night. What's most haunting isn't her image, but how closely she mirrors Lilith centuries later. Lilitu appears in triads of female spirits, Lilitu, Ardat Lili, and Lamashtu, each connected to infertility, infant mortality, and unbridled feminine power. In Mesopotamian art, they are winged, clawed, often standing atop lions, flanked by owls or serpents. Many believe the famous Burney relief, c. 1800 BCE, a terracotta plaque of a nude winged goddess with bird-like feet, is a depiction of Lilitu, or perhaps Lilith, remembered through layers of forgotten language. But here's where it gets stranger. Occult scholars have noted that Freemason symbolism and Rosicrucian iconography occasionally include winged female figures with owls, images that predate the official reintroduction of Lilith into modern occult thought. Some secret orders even refer cryptically to the Lady of the Left-Hand Path, a being tied to hidden wisdom, primal rebellion, and the moon's dark side. What if Lilith was never invented by later myth? What if she was remembered through Lilitu? And what if the real reason she was erased from holy texts wasn't because she was false, but because she was older than the god who cast her out? Lilith isn't just a biblical footnote. She's a shadow cast backward through time, a spirit whose name changed but whose power never died. You've heard the story of Eve. Now listen to the ones told before her. You can measure a culture's fear by the power of its protections. As Lilith's legend slithered its way into the bloodstream of ancient belief, so too did the spells, charms, and wards meant to keep her at bay. Fear became ritual. Ritual became religion. In Jewish folklore, especially across medieval Europe and the Middle East, Lilith was no longer just the first woman. She became the first predator. The one who crept into nurseries at night, whispering lullabies laced with venom. It was said she stole the breath of newborns, caused miscarriages, and seduced men in their dreams, draining their life essence. But people didn't take chances. They fought stories with symbols. Amulets bearing the names Senoi, Sansanoi, and Samanjalof, the same three angels sent to retrieve her from Eden, were hung over the beds of infants. Tiny bowls inscribed with spiraling Aramaic texts, known as incantation bowls, were buried at doorways to trap wandering spirits. And most telling of all, the name Lilith was written backward in ash, blood, or ink, because the backward name, they said, bound her power. In some traditions, parents would draw a protective circle in salt or chalk around a newborn's crib and inscribe a spell on the walls. Lilith, be gone. This house is not yours. But here's what the ancient texts don't explain. Why would an entire civilization mobilize layers of magic, architecture, and angelic names to ward off one woman? To some occult scholars, these protections weren't just about superstition. They were about control, about branding female independence as monstrous, about embedding at the very threshold of life itself the fear of a woman who dared to reject obedience. And while mainstream theology buried Lilith, the underground world of Kabbalists, mystics, and forbidden grimoires kept her name alive, not to curse it, but to understand its true power. Because deep down, maybe these protections weren't meant to keep Lilith out. Maybe they were meant to keep us in. Not every darkness is evil. Not every union is blessed by light. In the shadowy depths of Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism reveals a version of reality where creation is a balance, not a battle, between opposites, light and shadow, mercy and severity, order and chaos. And in this cosmology, Lilith returns, not as a cursed outcast, but as a queen. She is called the bride of Samael. Samael, known as the angel of death, the poison of God, is no ordinary demon. He is a complex figure, part accuser, part destroyer, part judge. In the Zohar, the foundational text of Kabbalah, Samael and Lilith are described as the dark mirror of Adam and Eve. Where Adam and Eve embody divine order, Lilith and Samael personify the chaotic forces of raw desire, judgment, and spiritual fire. Together, they rule a realm known as Sitra Akra, the other side, a dimension parallel to creation, made of rejected divine sparks and unbalanced energies. It is not hell, it is the side God turned away from, but never destroyed. From their union, legends say, were born countless Lilim, spiritual entities of darkness and distortion. But within Kabbalistic teaching, this isn't a tale of horror. It's a necessary truth. Creation cannot be whole without its shadow. Light alone blinds. It is through contrast that wisdom emerges. The mystical scholars of Safed whispered it carefully. Lilith is not evil. She is the unrectified feminine, the power we fear because we do not yet understand. This view of Lilith was kept secret, shared only among the initiated. For to speak of her as sacred, even necessary, was to challenge the dogma that had painted her with blood and blame. But in the hidden circles of esoteric Judaism, her name wasn't cursed, it was studied, because if Samael is the poison, then Lilith is the flame. and together they represent a force ancient, primal, and terrifyingly divine. Names don't just disappear, they are buried, deliberately, methodically, and with purpose. Lilith's absence from the canonical Bible isn't a simple omission, it's an erasure, the kind made not by accident, but by decision. Early versions of Genesis offer curious phrasing. In Genesis 1:27, man and woman are created simultaneously. Male and female, he created them. Yet just one chapter later, Eve is crafted from Adam's rib, an entirely different story. Why the contradiction? Some scholars believe this first woman was Lilith, a narrative that predated the creation of Eve. But as patriarchal structures solidified, Lilith's story became too dangerous. A woman who claimed equality, who refused male dominance, who left. That wasn't the kind of origin myth a rising religious order could afford to preserve. The early church fathers, the rabbinic councils, and later editorial redactors of the biblical canon all had reason to suppress her name. After all, religious orthodoxy wasn't built on ambiguity. It was built on control. Control of narrative, control of morality, control of gender. Lilith didn't fit, and so she was split. In some texts, she became a sexual demon. In others, a child killer, a nightmare stitched together from society's deepest anxieties about women who refuse roles assigned to them. But her fingerprints never truly vanished. Medieval grimoires kept her alive, her name scrawled in margins by candlelight. Kabbalists whispered of her duality, and in the vaulted libraries of secret societies, her image reemerged in arcane diagrams and encoded sigils. Some say the Cathars knew her true story, that certain Templar factions revered her as a veiled symbol of hidden wisdom, the feminine Sephira severed from the tree of life. Because when you try to erase a myth, it doesn't die. It becomes a ghost, haunting every symbol, every silence, every missing page. Lilith isn't gone, she was simply redacted. You can only silence a name for so long. In the 20th century, as hidden texts surfaced and old myths were re-examined, Lilith returned, not in whispers, but in roars. Feminist scholars uncovered her tale buried in rabbinic texts. They saw not a demon, but a woman exiled for asserting equality. Artists, poets, and witches began invoking her, not as a monster, but as a mirror, a reflection of what happens when power is denied, when voice is suppressed, when independence is punished. She became the icon of the unsubmissive feminine. In 1976, the Lilith magazine was born, a publication for Jewish feminism. In Wiccan and neo-pagan circles, Lilith was invoked as a goddess of sexual freedom and shadow work. She no longer stood outside Eden, she dismantled the gates entirely. But her return wasn't limited to the esoteric. In pop culture, Lilith began to haunt the screen. In The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, she appears as Madam Satan, a cunning, empowered, complex woman. In Neon Genesis Evangelion, Lilith is a cryptic divine entity buried beneath the city, suggesting origins even older than God. In Lucifer, she is the first wife, the origin of demons, the keeper of knowledge. And through every adaptation, one theme remains. Lilith knows something we're not supposed to. Even in modern occultism, her image reemerges in tarot decks, grimoires, and rituals. In some systems, she is aligned with the Black Moon Lilith, an astrological point symbolizing the wild, raw, untamed side of the feminine soul, the one that doesn't apologize. What once was meant to terrify now empowers. What once was banished now leads. Lilith isn't just reclaimed, she's redefined by artists, seekers, survivors, not as a footnote in someone else's story, but as a force, equal parts shadow and sovereignty. The question isn't why she was erased anymore, it's why we let them do it for so long. By now, you've heard the names, you've seen the symbols, you've followed the trail through clay tablets, sacred scrolls, forbidden grimoires, and the shadows of secret societies. But Lilith isn't just a figure of myth, she's a cipher, a code embedded in the architecture of civilization meant to remind us of something ancient, something we were told to forget. She is not merely a woman. She is what happens when a woman is not allowed to be one. She represents every voice labeled dangerous, every desire called impure, every boundary crossed in pursuit of truth. Lilith was demonized not because she was evil, but because she refused to be contained. In Eden, in Sumer, in the halls of Kabbalah, in the whispered rites of the initiated, she is the same archetype. The unapologetic feminine, the shadow we are told to fear but need to understand. What is more dangerous to a system of control than a woman who does not need permission? Lilith was not cast down because she sinned. She was cast out because she knew. She knew the name, she spoke the power, she walked away. And history didn't forget her by accident. It chose to, because Lilith is truth wrapped in terror. The truth that sometimes order is built on silence, that submission is manufactured, that myths are not born, they are edited. So the next time you hear that Eve was the first, remember, Eve was chosen, Lilith was erased, but she is speaking again. In ink, in blood, in data, in dreams. And if you've listened this far, maybe she's speaking too.